Hello everybody, and welcome to Chapter 3, pertaining to demand, supply, and the notion of market equilibrium. So we're going to look at markets, what we mean by demand, what we mean by supply, and what the notion is of market equilibrium. And market equilibrium is what we strive to achieve in economics. And finally, we're going to look at what happens when we make changes, and an application of what happens when the government tries to set prices. So in economics, markets are any time that there is interaction between buyers and sellers. They can be physical markets, such as a store. They can be virtual markets, such as the stock market, where you can do trading online of things like that. eBay is an example of a market. Amazon.com is an example of a market. So they can be both virtual and physical locations, but they're anywhere where a buyer and a seller can interact. And they can be local, national, international, so they differ in scale as well. And in a free economy or a market-based economy, price is generally discovered between the interactions of buyers and sellers. Depending on how much a product is desired, that's going to influence its price. So the desire for a product is what is known as demand. And demand is represented in economics as a curve. And it's a schedule or a curve that shows the various amounts of a product consumers are willing and able to purchase at each of a series of possible prices during periods of time. Demand can be shown as both a curve or a graph, that's generally a line graph, and that's the most common, or it can be shown as a table or a chart. And the amount consumers are willing and able to purchase at a given price is the demand. And we're going to assume that all other things are equal. And we're going to look at the difference between individual and market demand. So in economics, demand has an inverse relationship with price, always. As price falls, demand rises, and as price rises, demand falls. Now, this is not constant for everything in the sense that some products are a lot less sensitive to price than others. Something like gasoline, as much as we complain when it gets expensive, we do still have to buy it, and demand doesn't change that much, although it does decrease when it gets very expensive to at least some degree. Whereas something like Coca-Cola, which you can easily replace with something else, is very sensitive to price. So price acts as an obstacle to buyers, and also the law of diminishing marginal utility, and we'll get into this momentarily, and income and substitution effects. So what you need to remember is, number one, as price falls, demand goes up, and as price rises, demand goes down, always. Price acts as obstacles to a buyer, and it keeps them from being able to buy everything they want. We have, remember, unlimited wants and limited income. So as price of something goes up, we're going to buy less of it. Diminishing marginal utility refers to the decrease in added satisfaction as you continue to buy something. So the first time you buy a burger, for instance, you get a lot of satisfaction from it. If you, right after eating the first one, buy another one, you're probably going to get less satisfaction from the second, and so on. Until eventually, you probably won't get any satisfaction anymore. So that's why you'll see sales such as buy two, get one free, or buy three for the price of five, because that is taking advantage of that law of decreasing marginal utility. Even though you might not want five of something, if you get it for the price of three, it may become worthwhile, and the store gets to clear out some excess inventory. As for income effects, at a lower price, income effect is less powerful because you can purchase more of something, and at a higher price you're going to only be able to purchase less of it. So as price goes up, you may have to reduce your consumption of other goods, and it may make whatever this product is less attractive. Finally, the substitution effect is when a lower price gives incentives to substitute a lower price good for the higher priced one. So back to our example of Coca-Cola. If Coca-Cola doubled in price and Pepsi did not, we would probably substitute Coca-Cola for Pepsi, as they are broadly similar and the price of one may not change. This is what we mean by the substitution effect. And as you can see, we represent demand as a curve. So as price is going up, quantity demanded is very low, and as price is decreasing, quantity demanded is increasing. So on the right is a demand curve, and on the left is a demand schedule. We're looking at the same data. One is in chart form and one is plotted graphically. Market demand is all of the demand in a market for a good or a service. Now this is a pretty simple example because in this market there's only 3 possible buyers, Joe, Jen, and Jay. But in reality, market demand would be the combined demand of all of the possible buyers in a market. So there are 3 buyers in the market for corn, and your market demand is the horizontal summation, where you just simply add up all of the demand for each of the people in the market. So at $3, we would add up Joe's demand of 35, Jen's demand of 39, and Jay's of 26 to get a total demand of 100. And as you can see, total demand is lower at $5 and much higher at $1. So demand is changing based on price. So what can actually change demand here? Well, as we said before, price is what changes demand, quantity demanded. But what can change overall demand? So on the first curve, which I'll highlight right now, on the first curve here that I'm circling, D1, this is a function of price. As price changes, quantity demand changes. What about the second curve, which I'll annotate with the red arrow right here? Well, this second curve now, we have more demand at all possible prices. So with this second curve, we now have more demand at all possible prices. So what could actually cause the demand curve itself to shift and for us to be able to now have more demand at all possible prices? So determinants of demand which can do this are the following. Number 1, change in consumer tastes and preferences. Let's say that a product, a technological product gets invented when smartphones first came out. That demand curve moved out just like we saw once people realized what you could do with them and how you could run apps and the ways that they could make your life easier and the various things you could use a smartphone for. Many more people entered the market than were prior. That's change in consumer tastes and preferences. The flip side would be something like a VCR. Demand completely moved inward at all possible prices because no one really had a use for them anymore. So if there are more buyers in the market for a good, demand will increase. If there are less buyers in the market, demand will decrease. Finally, what about income levels? Normal goods are things like brand names or the goods that you are used to buying. So Coca-Cola versus store brand soda, or an iPhone or a Galaxy phone instead of a no-name knockoff phone from Amazon.com. That's the difference between normal and inferior goods. Generally, we buy normal goods in good economic times, and as our income increases, we buy more of them. Most of the goods we buy are normal goods, brand name, quality goods. But in bad economic times, if we're in a recession or if our economy is doing poorly or if we got our hours cut at work, we're probably going to buy more inferior goods. Inferior goods are cheap substitutes that can do broadly similar things but are not as good as what you actually want. So the cheap phone from Amazon can work as a phone, but it'll probably be of a low quality. The battery may not last very long. Store brand soda may not taste as good as Coca-Cola. Store brand dishwashing liquid may not work as good as Cascade, so on and so forth. Inferior goods sell well in poor economic times, but they are generally an inferior substitute to what you actually want. Other things which can determine demand: change in the price of related goods. So up first is what's known as a complementary good. And a complementary good is a good which we need to have something else to really get a benefit out of. So let's say we are looking at the demand for computers. Complementary goods would be all of the things that go with your computer. So keyboards, flash drives, mice, joysticks for gaming, extra memory drives you can put in your computer. Laptop bags would be a complementary good if we're looking at laptops. Those are all complementary goods. If we're looking at smartphones, wireless headphones are a complementary good. Portable chargers are a complementary good. So if the price of the main good changes, the price of the demand for the complementary goods will as well. So if overall the price of desktop computers shoots up, you're going to see at least some reduced demand in things like keyboards, flash drives, etc. Substitute goods are goods, once again, we can use in place of another. So Coke and Pepsi, Honda and Toyota, Ford and Chevy, those are all substitute goods. If we're looking at clothing, Reebok and Nike is an example of substitution. Generally, substitute goods are of the same quality. You may like one brand better than the other, but a Honda Accord is going to do everything a Toyota Camry can do. Coke and Pepsi are so similar that some people can't even tell the difference between them. And even if you can, they're still broadly similar. They're cola-flavored sodas. Apple and iPhone and a Samsung Galaxy phone. Once again, you may like one better, but they're of a similar quality level. They all have the same features. Those are substitutes. Whereas an inferior good is a good that is of a much lower quality. So if the price of iPhones tripled and Galaxies didn't, you'd probably see the demand for Samsung Galaxies go up. That's a substitute. And finally, what are changes in consumer expectations? Changes in consumer expectations, where we see the economy going. So if we think prices of things are going to go up in the future, demand right now is going to go up before the price change. Whereas think of Black Friday sales, you know the price is going to get cut in half next week, you're going to hold off buying the product until the price changes. So that can influence demand. And finally, income. If you know you're going to get a big raise at work, you're probably going to spend a lot more right now. Whereas if you know you're in danger of getting fired or your hours are going to get cut, you're probably going to spend a lot less right now. And those are all of the things that we looked at that can shift the demand curve. So this table here is worth going through. And if you look here, these are all examples of the 5 topics we covered. Change in taste, change in number of buyers, change in income, change in the price of related goods, and finally a change in expectations. So those are all of the things that can drive demand. On the flip side of the demand for a product is going to be its supply. And we represent supply just like we do with demand, with both a schedule, which is a chart, and a curve, which is a graph. And supply is going to show you how much the producers, or the companies or individuals which manufacture the goods and services, are going to be able to provide the market at a given price. And just like before, we have an individual supply, or the supply of one company, and then we have the market supply. So all of the supply of cell phones, or all of the supply of cars from all of the producers. That's a market supply. And the law of supply runs opposite the law of demand. If we hold everything else equal, as price goes up, supply is going to go up. Quantity supplied to the market is going to go up. And as price falls, quantity supplied is going to fall. So unlike demand, higher prices are very attractive to producers. You're going to be much more inclined to produce something if you can get more for it. But at some point, you can't just keep increasing supply without incurring a cost penalty. Eventually, you run out of factory space, you run out of employees to utilize, and you'll eventually hit a point where it becomes more and more expensive to keep increasing supply. So as a consequence, your supply curve is upwardsly sloping. So since it's upwardsly sloping, it means that it's becoming more and more expensive and more difficult to keep increasing supply once you get beyond a certain point. So if you look here, as quantity supplied goes up, price is going to go up as well, and the reason being it becomes more attractive to produce more of something if you can get more for it. So that's the supply curve on the right, supply schedule on the left. So just like demand, if we move from point A to point B on our supply curve here, that is a function of price. That is a function of price. And as we look on the left, this is now the market supply of 200 producers of corn, or all of the producers in this case. So what can move the supply curve? Well, a few things. First up, a change in resource prices. If the resources which you use to make your goods and services get more expensive, look at the chip shortage we just saw with a lot of companies, it's going to make supply shrink. You're going to get less goods and services of whatever this product is. If resource prices get cheaper, they find new raw materials or a new source of oil or something like that, it's going to make more supply. So your resources are very important. Technology is generally going to cause an increase in supply. Technology allows us to operate more effectively and efficiently, build things cheaper. So think of how smartphones got so much cheaper from when they first came out to now. Computers in the 1980s cost thousands of dollars in 1980s money and are now far cheaper in today's money. So technology generally increases supply of goods and services. If for some reason we start using less efficient technology or not investing in it, we'll actually get less supply. So technology is a very good thing. If you have more sellers, you're always going to get more supply. If you have people leaving the market, supply will always drop. Change in taxes and subsidies. Taxes are going to decrease supply. It makes it more expensive for companies to produce. Tax cuts will increase supply. So if companies' tax burden is going down, there'll be more supply. Government subsidies are when the government pays a company to make more of something. So if the government starts doing this, the goal is to increase supply. If they cut subsidies, supply will decrease. Change in the prices of other goods. If you're a keyboard manufacturer and computer prices are going up like crazy, you're probably going to cut your production of keyboards because that's once again a complementary product. If computer sales are going up and their price is going down, you're going to increase supply of things like keyboards and mice and flash drives, all of that. Also in the producer space as well, if the price of another good we can make goes up, so let's say we're Apple and tablet prices are shooting up, we're probably going to cut some production of MacBooks and phones and increase production of iPads. So we can do that as well. And the flip side happens if tablet prices are going to go down, we'll cut production of them. And finally, a change in producer expectations. If we see a bad economic climate coming up, we think that the economy is going to do very poorly, we'll probably cut our supply now. If we're expecting very good economic times, we'll probably increase it. So the important thing, just like demand, in economics that we strive to achieve is what is known as market equilibrium. And market equilibrium occurs when your demand and your supply curves cross. At market equilibrium, everything being supplied to the market is being demanded. So you should have no excess goods and services of whatever we're looking at and no excess demand, meaning we won't have a surplus too much of something or shortage too little. So at equilibrium, there's an equilibrium price and an equilibrium quantity. And market equilibrium is what economies strive to achieve, because at this point, once again, there's nothing left over and no excess demand. And it is the best scenario for an economy. So at equilibrium, we would say markets are efficient. And finally, prices allow us to achieve equilibrium. So the rationing function of prices is the ability of competitive forces of supply and demand to establish a price where we achieve equilibrium, where buying and selling decisions are coordinated and we don't have anything left over. Both surpluses and shortages are harmful economically. And this is what is known as efficient allocation, meaning we're making the right amount of whatever this good or service is for the economy. To achieve efficient allocation requires two things. Up first is what's known as productive efficiency, and productive efficiency is the production of goods and services in the least costly way, meaning we're going to use the best technology, the best labor, train them the best the best resources. We buy the most inexpensive imports that meet our needs. So we operate as best as possible. That's productive efficiency. You need productive efficiency to get the following: allocative efficiency. And allocative efficiency is producing the right mix of goods and services. Whatever is demanded by the economy, whatever is needed by the individuals who live in whatever country or region we're looking at, that is allocative efficiency, making the goods and services that they demand. That is most highly valued by society. You can have productive efficiency without allocative efficiency. You could be the world's best producer of VCRs or 1970s bell-bottom pants, but if we don't have any demand for them, we're not operating in an allocatively efficient manner. We're not making the proper mix of goods and services. So what we mean by equilibrium is the following: where the two curves are crossing, and we'll highlight this point, where the two curves are crossing right here, that is equilibrium. That is equilibrium. So 7,000 bushels of corn at $3 per bushel is where both curves are going to cross. At that case, there will be no excess corn left over or no excess demand. If we move the price to $4, at $4 we have a 6,000 bushel surplus. Demand is 4,000, but supply is 10. Higher price, more supply. So we have a lot of leftover corn, which is going to rot, no one will buy it, and as a consequence, it's not efficient. Whenever you get surpluses are generally when you get things like your clearance sales, stuff like that. And finally, if we lowered price to $2, we'd have a 7,000 bushel shortage. $2, demand's going to spike to 11,000 bushels, but the market will only be supplied with 4,000 because it's a lower price, less attractive to grow corn if it's that cheap. So in both situations, the economy is not going to do as well as at equilibrium. Where at equilibrium, the exact proper mix of goods and services are being made. No excess supply and no excess demand. Change. You would have this example here on the right. More demand on the left here. More demand leading to higher prices. So you could make the argument that what the government should do instead is subsidize supply but supply doesn't. Now you can run into situations where both supply and demand change. So if you have an increase in supply and a decrease in demand, price is going to drop by rule. We're not sure what would happen on equilibrium. It would depend which of the two moved more. If we have a decrease in supply and an increase in demand, by rule price is going to go up. But once again, as for equilibrium quantity, it would all depend on which one moved more. If both supply and demand increase, we're certainly going to get greater quantity, but we don't know what's going to happen to price. It would depend on, did supply go up more or did demand go up more? And the same thing happens in choice 4 here. If supply and demand both decrease, we'll have less quantity by rule, but we're not sure what's going to happen with equilibrium. And that's going to bring us to our last point here, pertaining to what happens if the government decides to get involved with prices. So when the government gets involved with prices, you can run into what is known as a price ceiling or a price floor. A price ceiling is a situation where the government sets a maximum price, and generally it is below equilibrium. Rent control or something like that for apartments is an example of a price ceiling. Let's say the market rate for rent is $2,500 a month, but the government says you can't charge more than $2,000 a month for an apartment. That's a price ceiling. Since the price is below equilibrium, you're always going to run into a problem of shortages. And the reason you're going to run into a problem of shortages is it's not that attractive to go into a market when you have to charge a price less than equilibrium. So even though the price will be cheap and you'll have a lot of demand, you run into a situation where you're going to have not enough supply. Now, other issues that happen are, number one, you get what's called a rationing problem. So since there aren't enough for everybody, who do we make sure gets the apartment or whatever product we are giving this price ceiling to? And it's called a price ceiling because you can't go above the ceiling. And that generally leads to black markets, things where we illegally charge more than we're legally allowed or something like that. So you can get black markets with price ceilings as well. And they lead to inefficiency in an economic sense. So if we look here, here's an example of a price ceiling. The real equilibrium price is $3.50 in this example, but the government mandated price is $3. That's what the ceiling price is. And note, you wind up with a fairly large shortage. You wind up with a shortage and you have a lot more demand than supply. Remember, at a price below the market rate, we generally don't have very much supply because it's not very attractive to producers to supply the market in this scenario. The alternative to the opposite of a price ceiling is what is known as a price floor. So you can't go above the ceiling, you can't go below the floor. And in a price floor, we set a price above the market price. And generally this leads to chronic surpluses. Minimum wage law is a price floor, for instance. Morally, minimum wage is a good thing, but in a purely economic sense, it leads to a situation where you have more workers generally than jobs. By rule, anytime minimum wage gets increased, you generally see layoffs, and this is an example of it. And in a price floor, you cannot go below the floor, and as a consequence, there's going to be a lot more supply. It's very attractive to supply the market, but there's going to be a reduction in demand because the price is above the market price. And in a price floor, you wind up with this situation. You wind up in a situation of a surplus. So our equilibrium price here is $2. That's our equilibrium price. Our price floor here is $3, and we wind up with a sizable surplus. There's much more supply than demand, and you have leftover goods or services or whatever we're looking at that is not being consumed or purchased. So both price ceilings and price floors lead to economic inefficiency. And we're going to finish up on our last point here pertaining to college costs and why you can argue that government subsidies can backfire. So by increasing demand, student loans have increased the price of education. This is a completely true fact, and there is almost a direct correlation between this. In 1958, the federal government began subsidizing student loans, and we've watched college tuition costs rise steadily, far beyond the cost of inflation. 1971 to 72, 1,405 public, 2,929 private. 2017 to 2018, around just over 25,000 for public schools and about 51,000 for private schools, and it's now significantly higher than that. So by subsidizing student loans, the government was trying to increase demand for college. And that's a very good goal. More college degrees are better for society and better trained workforce. However, you could make the argument, dedicate government money to building more colleges, and if there's a greater supply, you'll still get more access to education, and it should bring the costs down. Whether or not this will actually hold true is dependent on whether or not this will hold true is all dependent on what we do in the future. So that's going to bring us to the end of